Welcome to Parenting Teens with Dr. Cam, the podcast dedicated to helping you tackle the challenges of parenting teenagers without the drama. I'm your host, Dr. Cam. Let's get on with the show. Raise your hand if your teen started talking, dressing, or thinking like their friends, and you're sitting there wondering, who even are you right now? If you're worried your teen's getting swept up in the wrong crowd or losing themselves just to fit in, you're not overreacting. Peer pressure is real and it can be powerful. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Brett Laursen, a global expert on friendship, conformity, and why teens are so quick to follow the crowd. He's spent decades studying thousands of kids around the world, and he's got eye-opening insight into why some teens are more easily influenced than others, and how well-meaning parents like us can sometimes make things worse even without realizing it. Before we dive in, though, can I ask you a quick favor? If this podcast ever makes you feel seen, understood, or even a little more hopeful, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if today's conversation hits home, leave a quick review. I read every single one, and it helps more parents find the support when they need it most. All right, let's get into it. Dr. Laursen, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I always like to start with a backstory. What got you interested in peer pressure and looking at the influence of peers?
Well, I've been working on peer relationships since graduate school. I was fortunate enough to work with the world's leading expert at the Institute of Child Development, Minnesota, many years ago. So I've been on a peer relations track for some time. What got me interested in looking at peer influence was that about 20 years ago, people were talking a lot about peer influence, but they didn't really know very much about it. They were measuring a lot of things like how similar were you to your friends and assuming that demonstrated peer influence. So that got us to thinking that maybe we should do it better. And so we launched several longitudinal studies at locations around the world that enabled us to really follow children over long periods of time so that we could really measure the degree to which they were influenced by their friends. So let me just quick say that one of the operational definitions that we're going to take away today for peer influence is that we're going to measure change. And so the assumption of peer influence is that one child changes to become more similar to their friend. And so in order to measure that kind of change, we have to have data points across several periods of time so that we can see how similar I'm becoming to you and how similar you're becoming to me. So the backstory is that we're very much interested in how children come to look like one another. And that's how we're going to measure influence, is we're going to assume they become more similar to one another over time.
So what have you noticed that a lot of people seem to have gotten wrong about peer pressure or peer influence? And peer pressure we use, it always makes it sound like it's negative. It's not always negative, is it?
Yeah, that would be when you took my line away when I'm going to ask you, when you're going to ask me what's the thing that most people get wrong about it, is the assumption that it's bad. And I try not to use the term peer pressure because that implies that it is bad. And it certainly can be. I'm not here to say that it's always good, but it's really a glass half full. Certainly there's a lot of peer pressure to do the right thing, to stop doing the wrong thing, to, not to pick your nose, to tuck your shirt in if time is for tucking your shirt in. Peer pressure works in the direction of having children become more pro-social, recycle more, do better at school, stop goofing around. So we want to give peers credit for doing the right thing, and whenever possible. And so we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of peer pressure for good kids to do good stuff, just as much as there is from bad kids to do bad stuff. So we shouldn't assume right away at all that peer pressure is a bad thing. Peer pressure is the only people who avoid peer pressure are hermits. Because they don't live around anybody.
Right.
And otherwise everybody's confronted with peer pressure. Moms listening to this story right now thinking they don't have any peer pressure. I invite you to look around at the SUVs that are white in your parking lot that all the other moms are driving, and then tell me that there isn't any peer pressure.
There's a lot of peer pressure. You're right. I think it gets even worse when you're an adult. You're more aware of it, right? And you need to kind of fit in. What I find very interesting is when teens develop negative behaviors, it's often looked at, oh, that's due to peer pressure. And we don't often look at their good traits and go, oh, that's due to peer influence. So why are we so, and do you see this? Are we quick to blame peer pressure for behaviors that we don't like?
Uh, I would say we're certainly quick to blame it. Uh, it's an interesting problem because one of the things that we know by doing our longitudinal research is one of the things that we know is that the similarity that we often see between two sets of friends, let's say, much of it is because similar children are becoming friends. In other words, you pick somebody who is like you to become a friend, and then parents look at those two kids and they're both behaving badly, and they think that the friend is the problem, when in fact the child who has behavior problems is probably looking to become friends with somebody else who has behavior problems, just as the kid who's athletic is looking to become friends with other kids who are athletic, and the kids who like Minecraft are looking to become friends with other kids who like Minecraft. So you're right, we're very quick to say, oh, it's the problem with the friend, when in fact the child brought those characteristics to the relationship, and those were probably the foundation for the formation of the relationship. Then they become more similar if the friendship is successful. So then there's peer influence to push them to become even more similar so that the relationship succeeds. But a lot of that similarity they bring to the relationship from the beginning because it forms the core.
Dr. Laursen, I think that's an interesting thing to focus on too, because a lot of times when we don't like our kids' friends, and I want to get a little bit into what do we do, but I've noticed when parents say something negative about kids' friends, it's not just a defending their friend. It feels like a personal attack. And what you're saying it kind of is, because if you're attacking something about a friend and you like that friend because they're similar to you, we're attacking our own kid, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So let's just sort of rewind and repeat what I implied, which is that when we go out to make a new friend, whatever age we are, the old idea that opposites attract, that's ridiculous. That just isn't true, and we have boatloads of research to say that that's just not the way things work. We select people who are similar to ourselves, and in fact, we have a lot of very interesting research that says even before a friendship begins, we can predict whether it's going to be successful or not by how similar those two children are in the beginning, even before they become friends. So we know who's going to become friends on the basis of how similar they are. We know once they become friends, how long the friendship is going to last on the basis of how similar they are. So you're absolutely right when you say, I don't like those attributes in your friends. You're saying, I don't like those attributes in you.
Right. But I'm going to blame your friend on them, not
Right.
you on them. So let's look at, I have so many questions. So let's start with one of the biggest questions parents have. I don't like my kids' friends. I feel like even if they met them because they're similar, I feel like they're encouraging behavior that I don't want to encourage in my teen. And so now we're fighting all the time because I'm trying to get them to befriend somebody else. And I'm constantly telling them, I don't want you hanging out with this. And it causes blowups. How do we handle it if we see them hanging out with people that we think are a really bad influence?
Let's remind ourselves it's easy as a parent to forget what it was like to be in middle school and in high school. So let's remind ourselves how life has changed really dramatically over the course of these years. So when children are in primary school, they're in an environment that's very much adult centered. They have the same teacher all day, every day, with the exception of, going off to something special for an hour or two here or there. But they have the same teacher every day, all day. And that teacher knows who's in the classroom. The peers don't really change all that much. You're with the same 15 or 30 kids. And so the environment is very much driven by adults. And then they go home to an environment that's also pretty much driven by adults.
Yeah.
Adults drive them from place to place. Adults supervise what they do. Adults decide who comes over and who doesn't. Then they move to middle school, and everything changes in middle school. Suddenly, in middle school, you're not in the same class with 15 kids all day, every day. In a lot of middle schools, you're moving around all the time with different classes. So suddenly you're in school with maybe 60 or 80 different peers, and the teachers don't own the classrooms anymore. You go and you spend 1 hour with this teacher, and then you go and spend 1 hour with that teacher, and then you go and spend another hour with another teacher. It stops being an adult organized life and it starts being a peer organized life. Now, suddenly, children have to navigate their own way around these new circumstances. And in order to do that, they have to rely on one another. There's no adult there who's going to make things better, who's going to tell them, do this, don't do that. Suddenly, peers become the predominant social organizer.
Yeah.
Even though adults think they're still running the show, they're not anymore. It's now a peer world where adults are peering in, trying to figure out what's going on.
I like that.
So if you're a child, who's important? Some adult out there who doesn't know what's going on and doesn't understand, or the people that you see every day who are helping you try to navigate this new complicated social world? So suddenly we've created a social system that requires children to rely on their friends, that requires children to pay a lot of careful attention to the social structure around them. So when we think about the fact that we don't like friends, we don't like what's happening, we have to remember that whatever we have to say, children know is kind of irrelevant. I hate to tell parents that, but but in terms of the big scheme of things, children know that every day they have to navigate this complicated social world that's dominated by peers, and that adults don't really get it, are not really involved in it, and what they have to say about it is not going to change much of anything. So we have to always keep in mind when we're trying to navigate these problems with children, that they're focused on this really complicated new social structure. And this new social structure has terrible consequences for children who fail.
Yeah.
Children without friends, children who get tossed out of the group, children who are rejected. These are really awful things. These children get victimized, don't get invited to activities, they become depressed. All kinds of anxiety ensues. I could go on and on. All kinds of bad consequences follow from not being successful in this new world of peers. So when adults say, why aren't they paying any attention to me? The answer is because the things that really matter right now are succeeding in this new social environment that we have created for them that requires them to navigate this complicated social structure without any real adult oversight. We think there's adult oversight. There's not really a lot of adult oversight in terms of how children are treating one another during middle school and high school.
Yeah.
That didn't answer your question exactly, but it's something we always have to bear in mind when we're asking ourselves, I don't like the friends that my child has. I don't like the behavior that they're doing. We need to take a step back and remind ourselves what's happening in their lives now that's so different from what it was when they were in primary school, when they used to listen to me, when I used to have control over who their friends were and what they were doing. Now I don't have that kind of control anymore. I need new ways of thinking about how my children are navigating are interacting with peers.
I think it's so important too that we realize there's so much more going on that we don't know, which I think scares us as parents. But it also, when we approach it from our perspective, we're just proving we don't get it. And I think a lot of teens just go, well, whatever you're saying now, you've just proved you don't understand the nuances, which they're not thinking nuance, but you're not getting it. So why am I listening to you when you don't understand, right? So in a way, do you think, and this just came to me while you're talking, do you think it's better that kids have friends that may not be the best influence or not have friends when they don't have negative influences then?
That's a very, very good question, and one that we struggle to answer successfully. But my personal opinion is that, well, first, a couple of things to bear in mind. One thing about peer influence that we know, I'm going to take us on a sidetrack to answer your question. One thing about peer influence that we know is that it's often not equal within a relationship, that one child often has more influence than the other. And so, to your point that adults don't know what's happening in peer relationships, it may very well be the case that in this particular friendship, your child has more influence over the other friend than vice versa. Lots of different variables go into deciding who has more influence within a friendship. One interesting one is that children who have lots of friend options are more influential than children with fewer friend options. So if I only have one friend or two, and you, my friend, have several friends, I'm going to probably do whatever you want me to do in order to make sure that our friendship stays the same, because I don't want to be friendless, because I know all the consequences of being friendless. If my mother doesn't like you and tries to bust up our friendship, and let's say that you were influencing me and now your mother says, no, don't be friends with Brett anymore. Your next friend might not be somebody who is going to listen to you, but in fact, you may decide that you have to listen to them. So you might be breaking up a friendship where the child is more influential, forcing them into a relationship where they're the one being influenced. We don't know what's going on in our friendship dynamics well enough to be able to say that my child is the influential one, or my child is the one being receiving bad influence, so much that I'm going to push them out of that relationship and force them into a new one, which is it going to be better? We have no idea. Are they even going to make a new friendship? We have no idea. So the answer to your question is, unless you really, really know what's happening in a friendship, and unless you're really, really sure that your child isn't going to be friendless, you should be very hesitant about taking a hard line against that relationship. There are far better, more constructive strategies to stay relevant than trying to force your child to be friendless into that. Because be sure, if your child had a friend and is now friendless because of you, you're going to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's not a position you want to put yourself in.
Right. Now let's flip it. We've got a kid who's struggling to make friends. And we're watching our kid go to school and be alone, and it's devastating. How do we handle that?
That's an easier one.
Oh, is it? Oh, good.
Actually,
Okay.
a much easier one. It's a harder one to know what to do with children who have problematic friends. But children who are struggling to make friends, what we as parents need to do is we need to first recognize what are their primary interests. What are the things that other people are going to be attractive to them? Remember, I said earlier that we're looking for similar others. If our child likes to play video games, we're not very excited about that, but that's their thing, and you want them to have friends, then you need to create opportunities for them to meet others who share similar interests. That might be joining clubs, that might be going to activities, that might be spending some money in order to foster an interest. So they express some kind of interest in some kind of extracurricular activity. They don't have a lot of friends. Go for it. Figure out what their salient features are, what other kids are going to say, oh, there's somebody who looks like me.
Right.
And then give them opportunities to meet other people who look like me. Even if it's not the traits that you are most enthusiastic about, it still gives them an opportunity to find others who share similar interests, and then they can build relationships on those similar interests.
I love that. And I think we often as parents, I want to ask too, like, how involved should we get? One of the things I see is that parents end up pushing their kids to make friends and to belong to things. And there's a lot of pressure on the kid to make friends. And to the kid, it almost starts building some sort of anxiety. Like, I'm not okay if I don't have the friends my mom or dad needs me to have. So how involved should we be if we see this, our children struggling with friendships?
Well, we have to reframe as our children get older. We just have to reframe our role. We're no longer in the driver's seat anymore. Our job is to create opportunities, and our job is to make sure that we continue to be relevant. So we just talked about creating opportunities. The opportunities are not something where you say, I'm taking you to chess club so you can make friends. The opportunities are, if you enjoy chess, let's go to chess club, and then if you see anybody you like there, let's go have a malt afterwards, or let's go do something fun afterwards. So the opportunities are one role. Create opportunities, and the other role that we have is to maintain positive relationships with our children. Full stop. Mm-hmm. Regardless of how much they screw up. Because if you think about your own life, if you've got some questions about what to do, if you're wondering what the right decision to make is, you don't say, oh, I'm going to ask somebody that I fight a lot with about what their opinion is and see what they think, and then maybe I'll do what they think. You're going to go to people that you have a good relationship with, that you feel positive about, people who are not going to judge you and people who are going to give you some positive advice, but not be annoyed if you don't take it.
Right.
You have to stay relevant. So you create opportunities and you maintain positive relationships, because only relevant parents get asked advice, and only relevant parents have kids who are going to take their advice. Now, don't assume they're going to always take it, and don't assume they're going to ask for it. But you should assume that if you have a negative relationship with your child, you have no standing to give advice, and you certainly have no expectation that they're going to take that advice. And so what I'm not saying is be this relaxed, I don't care about, you can do what you want, everything is great parent. I'm not talking about being completely permissive. I'm talking about working hard at maintaining relationships, just as you do with other important people in your life. You have to treat them now like you would treat other kinds of adults who want to have positive relationships with you. You have to stay relevant. You have to provide them with opportunities. That's your job now. It's no longer to tell them what to do.
I'm applauding you. I think it is a very difficult thing for parents to take a step back and let their kids kind of run with it. So I love that even when we're talking about peer influence, and one of the things I'm always talking about, it's parent influence. And that's all we've got is influence now. We can't control. We can influence. And influence, just like with peers, requires us to get it, to understand, to have a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you don't approve of everything your friends do.
No.
and if you tell them they're wrong and you're not going to talk to them anymore because of it, that's not a very effective strategy for maintaining a relationship. And this is your goal with your children now, is to create and maintain constructive relationships with them. It's okay to say, I don't agree with that. And it's okay to say, let's talk about other strategies for addressing this. But if you try to dictate things, it's going to go south. Let me tell you one thing that we know. We know that if parents tell their children they don't like their friendships, they want them to not be friends with that child anymore, it might be successful. They may very well disrupt the relationship. Parents might think that's great. I'm here to tell you it's a disaster. It's a disaster for two reasons. First of all, your child is going to be super angry with you for terminating a friendship. And second of all, when in middle school and in high school, when other kids find out that your parent is meddling in relationships, their peer standing goes south. And so quickly they become rejected. They get left out of the peer group. Things go bad. And so parents may say, I don't like your peers. Parents may say that, I don't like your peers because you're behaving badly. And so they disrupt the relationship. So the child's standing in the peer group goes down. And so in response to their standing going down, they behave even worse. They may make worse friends. They start acting up more. So exactly the thing that the parent thought they were preventing
Yeah.
is actually becoming worse because of their meddling in peer relationships. This is not my opinion. We see this in several different studies that children get a bad rep among their peers when their parents start to fiddle with their relationships. And that makes the whole peer scene worse.
I've seen the opposite too, where parents try really hard to make sure their kids have friends by like creating, events or doing whatever and trying to like lure friends in. And I feel like it has the same negative impact because it's not the kid making the friends, right?
Well, I don't know if that's as big of a problem, but I could certainly see how that kids who have a mom who's trying to, or a dad who's trying too hard to be cool might be a little bit eye rolling for the peers to come over. So I could see how one could certainly overdo that.
So if we're seeing our kids struggling with their friends and they're coming home and they're sad or they're upset, what can we do?
Uh, Again, I think that most, well, first of all, let's assume that there's not some kind of clinical levels of problems going on, in which case we immediately refer to therapy. But if it's really kind of some transitional adjustment problems, I think you have to have discussions with your child about what is it that they like to do, what is it that they find that they enjoy doing in their free time, and build on some free time activities that will provide them with opportunities to meet with others. Um, and I know that some children are going to say, "I don't like to do anything, and I'm not good at anything," and that's okay. Then what you have to do is you have to say, "Great, let's figure out. Let's provide some new opportunities for things that might be fun. You haven't ever tried this. This is something that nobody cares if you're good at it or not good at it." I like to use the example of frisbee golf. Nobody cares if you're great at frisbee golf. People go out there and goof around on it, and you can do this with other people, and they have pickup games, blah, blah, blah. That may not be the answer that you're looking for, but find a non-threatening, non-judgmental, fun thing to do and give it a try. You might have to do it with them the first time or two, which will humanize you because you won't be any good at it either.
Right.
And that's another good way to maintain a positive relationship with your child. Give them opportunities, try it yourself, show them that you're willing to do something, do it poorly, have some fun.
Yeah. I love that. And just you're supporting them rather than pushing them.
Oh, absolutely. You have to let them be the driver. Another way of doing this is to say, I've got $150 for us to do something fun. Let's figure out what we can do, and then let them determine what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You don't get to decide what concert you get to go to together. They're going to decide what concert you get to go to together, or where you're going to have dinner, or what kind of sporting event you're going to see.
Yeah. So, Dr. Laursen, I want to jump a little bit online because I hear a lot of parents and who are worried that they get lured into different groups or different areas online, and that drives who they become, so that they're highly influenced. And I think we see this in just terms of what their interests are, but I see this parents looking at it in terms of their gender or their sexuality or things like that. Like they're getting pulled into these areas and they're getting told and influenced to become something they're not. What do you see that as an issue? Do you think they're getting it right, or are we misunderstanding what's happening?
We don't completely understand the distinctions between what's happening online versus what's not happening online. What's happening in, I'll call it real life, although that's a fuddy-duddy way of viewing it, in-person life. We're pretty confident that well-adjusted children use their online activities as a supplement to their in-person friendships and relationships. So they use that to build and supplement and to boost and to encourage. And it isn't typically the driver, it's the accelerant for children who have a lot of friends and who are doing pretty well. The bigger worry is for children who are struggling in their social world and they're using the online world as a substitute or replacement for in-person relationships. For some children, it's a perfectly reasonable and successful substitute if they're really struggling in in-person relationships. Although I would argue they should still be working on some in-person relationships too. But for other children, they will retreat to the online world because they're not having success in in-person relationships, and then it can become both challenging for parents who don't have any idea, really have no idea about what's going on in the online environment. And also, there's a good chance that they're also interacting with other children who are similarly struggling with a lot of issues. And so then the line between healthy and not healthy gets more difficult to discern. But I would say if your child is doing well in their in-person relationships, they're probably viewing the online world as another way to boost what they're doing in person. And I wouldn't really worry a whole lot about it. It's not typical in my understanding that really successful, socially successful children are somehow led astray suddenly in the online world. It's more likely the socially vulnerable children who find online world to be potentially problematic in terms of adjustment.
What do you recommend parents do if they do have a vulnerable kid? And how do we know we have a vulnerable kid?
Here I'm going to say that there's going to be age group differences here, because adolescence is such a broad category that we should recognize that your 10 to 12-year-old is a very different creature than your 15 to 18-year-old. Your 10 to 12-year-old really shouldn't be online much.
Yeah.
And how you handle that is a struggle, I recognize. But legally and psychologically, this is not the right space for them right now. Right. And so you have to figure out, and I recognize that this is a super big challenge. I had kids too at that age, and it's very hard. But this is one place where some boundaries are appropriate and necessary. Older kids they just have to, when you're 15, 16, 17, 18, you're living in an online world for sure, just like adults are. And now you have to help them with strategies to successfully navigate it. And that includes things like, if your school is not already teaching them what's a good website, what's not a good website, how to do this and how to do that, then it's perfectly fine for you to work with them on that. What's not okay is to join their groups, to peer in on them, and to be that kind of parent who's snooping and monitoring on the sidelines, whether it's overt or covert. That's again back to you're not going to be a relevant person if you're the kind of parent who's going to do that sort of thing. So once your kids get to be in the late teens, young adults, you're back to playing a supportive role and not playing a role where you're dictating terms.
Yeah, I see a lot of that actually, of parents that are looking through the social media, looking through their browse history, looking through all that, often behind their back. They find something that's worrisome and they don't know what to do with it because they don't want to lose their trust by telling them they violated their trust. But then they have information that they don't know how to get out of their kid. So it ends up being a very precarious situation for them.
I could see that. The same sort of precarious situation as if they had gone through their sock drawer and found stuff they didn't want to find there.
Yeah. And that happens too. So I think that, again, this need, and I think this is really what's really scary, is we need to have some trust in our kids. And I think a lot of parents want to trust their kids, but they don't trust the environment their kids are in, or that their kids can handle that trust. So they feel a need to intercede to keep their kids safe. So how do we reconcile that?
I will repeat that it's much easier to do in the in-person environment than it is in the online environment. And I am not an expert in social media, and even someone who was would tell you this is a very, very challenging world that we live in right now. I'm expecting that in the next few years, there's going to be a lot more structure around what children can and cannot do, and when they can and cannot access certain platforms.
Yeah.
And we can already see that coming. Now it's still a bit of a Wild West world, and I guess my only advice, which is I recognize parents are going to go, that's pretty lame, but my only advice is once again to encourage healthy in-person relationships for your children,
Yeah.
so that they're going to not be forced to turn to the online world as a substitute. We need to recognize that if they're always going to be online to some degree or another, but that you can help them set up boundaries by phone away during meals, for instance. Phone away during meals means you do it too, by the way. But some boundaries are suitable, but it's very hard to do anything other than have conversations with your children about what they're doing and who they're talking to, and asking questions that are not judgmental.
Yeah. Dr. Laursen, as you're saying this, it kind of made me think about it's the same philosophy in a way as, being healthy and losing weight. We want a fast pass and be like, just tell us what we need to do, how we control it, what to stop it. And it is, you got to diet, you got to eat well, you got to exercise. You've got to connect with your kids. You've got to have that relationship with them, and you've got to put in that work. And when you do, then you have the influence and the ability to help your kids learn to navigate online.
I think that's a very important point to make. And I would again recognize that if you have a positive relationship with your child, they're going to volunteer information to you, and they're going to be responsive to conversations that are constructive, where you try to meet them on their own ground. If you don't have a positive relationship with them, they're not going to tell you anything anyway. So you can pry as much as you want, but they're not going to share things that matter, and they're not going to listen to what you have to say about whatever it is that you may have to say one way or another. So I would return to keeping your relationship with your child positive and constructive, and then hoping that conversations where you meet them on their own ground, not judgmental conversations, but conversations where you ask them to explain things that you're this dumb adult and you don't understand, that they might offer some things and might be willing to hear some of the insights that you might have to offer, but they need to again be non-judgmental and offered in the spirit of here's what I think about it, but I recognize this is not the life I have to lead.
Yeah, I love that. What have I not asked that is important for parents to know?
One way, and it's not that you haven't asked it, but one thing that parents often have a difficult time doing is connecting to their children because they've sort of lost touch. And I think that I've already suggested that you allow children to dictate activities instead of you dictate activities, and that's important. And another thing is to start making sure that your child sees you more as a human, as a person, and less as this thing, this person, this omnibus adult. You're transitioning from being this idea of a parent to this person as an adult. When your child is 22, you want to have a relationship with him that's kind of adult with adult. You're not going to have a relationship where you dictate terms to them. So you're making this transition to having more of what we would call a horizontal relationship with your child, where you're equals. And that starts early. It doesn't start early by giving them autonomy necessarily, but it starts early by making yourself see like a person. So you're going to share stories about yourself. You're going to tell them embarrassing moments. You're going to tell them about times when you screwed up. Not that, learn from my mistakes and don't make them again, but humanizing yourself and making yourself, I make these kind of mistakes too. And it was really embarrassing and I had to recover by X. I'm not how you recover. I'm saying that these things happen and then we have to sort it out. And so you want to make sure that they understand that you're a person too, who's made plenty of mistakes. And also you might come to them with questions and opinions. I have this problem. What do you think I should do? they're going to be more willing to reciprocate if you treat them along these kinds of lines. So start treating them more like people and
Right?
less like kids.
Yeah, I love that. And parents will say, well, I'll start treating them more like adults when they start acting more like adults. And I always say they'll start acting more like adults when you start treating them
Yes.
more like adults. We got to flip that, right?
That's an excellent point.
What is one thing, and I know this is always hard, especially when you've done decades of research, but what is one thing you really want to make sure parents are walking away with from this episode?
Well, they have to recognize that peer influence is there, it's pervasive. And if they frame this as a competition between themselves and the friends, then they're going to lose. It can't be about do it my way or do it your friend's way, because then you're going to be in the wrong spot. You have to reframe this challenge as being one of, my child is out there in this complicated social world. What can I do to help?
I love that. That's beautiful. So, Dr. Laursen, how can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to track down online. I'm Brett Laursen, Laursen, Brett Laursen. There's only really one Brett Laursen online, but if you really want to track me down further, it's Brett Laursen at Florida Atlantic University. I have a website. There's plenty of access to materials and papers there, as well as ways to get in touch with me. So that's Brett Laursen, Laursen. You'll find me at Florida Atlantic University.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing all your research and insights.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap. Thank you, parents, for taking time out of your busy day to listen in. I appreciate you. If you found the episode enlightening, please like, review, and share with a friend navigating the teen years. Until next time, stay curious. Remember, there's always more to the story than what you see.